Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Lester. I'm a cardiologist. I work at the Mayo Clinic, and I just want to welcome everyone to the Galien Foundation, a week of innovation webinars that are being held in New York. Really, the objective this week is to provide additional content and background for our largest annual event, the Galien USA Awards, to be held this Thursday in New York, in conjunction with our annual Galien Forum of Speakers, representing really top scientific experts and leaders in global health. Because the mission of Galien is innovation to improve the human condition, we have developed this new webinar series to give our nominees for Best Pharmaceutical, Best Biotech, and Best MedTech product greater visibility in describing their journey to medical discovery. This year's Galien USA Awards has a record 67 nominees for our three categories from 54 companies covering 13 diverse therapeutic areas, ranging from cancer, cardiology, neurosciences, to infectious diseases and very rare genetic diseases. And we are looking closely at the products in all of these critical areas throughout the week. And because the number of nominees and the range of conditions represented by all this excellent science, the Galien USA Awards Committee has decided to host a series of 10 webinars prior to Thursday's award ceremony, where all winners in each of the best of categories will be announced. And the 10 webinars are really drilled down on the different therapeutic focus of the products, the quality of the science behind them, and most important, the real clinical impact this is going to have for our patients. It is intended to give our award attendees, the media, and the public a fuller picture of the innovation behind the medicine and science. In the Best MedTech category, which is really our focus for today, we are holding 3 webinars due to the large number of products, actually 18 of which representing this very important field. I and my fellow members of the awards committee decided to arrange the 3 MedTech webinars to center on specific types of MedTech technologies: diagnostic, digital and therapeutics, and personalized medicine, cardiovascular medicine, and implant devices, and other therapeutic areas. This webinar will have an hour allotted to us and is devoted to the 6 nominees in cardiovascular medical and device implants. And what we're going to cover today really relates to the central question: how much are new technologies and engineering efficiencies contributing to the clinical progress against the world's biggest killer disease? I do want to note that the webinar will allot some time for audience questions, so please use the Q&A below to provide your questions so that we can use these throughout the program. I also want to take a moment at this time to open up a poll where we'd like to ask all of you to engage at the beginning so we can ask you a particular poll question. So we're going to open up a poll before we get started into our discussion. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to vote on the poll. I'm going to end the poll now. And so now let's really move into our discussion. The exciting part of this morning is to really have engagement, discussion, and interaction. I'll start by introducing the nominees to this category. Again, cardiovascular medical and device implants, participating the sort of scientific and clinical representatives who are joining us here today on this webcast. I'd like to introduce Dr. David Hayes, Chief Medical Officer of Biotronic, who will be talking to us about the PK Papyrus cover-coated stent. We have Brian Conklin, PhD and Mechanical Engineering at Edwards Life Sciences, talking about the Inspirus Resilia aortic valve. Laxin Siramani, VP of RD, transcatheter heart valves, also from Edwards, talking about the Sapien 3 Ultra transcatheter heart valve system. We have Santosh Prabhu, Divisional Vice President, Product Development of Abbott Structural Heart, talking about their transcatheter mitral valve repair system, or Abbott's Microclip. Dr. Rao, Medical Director from Impulse Dynamics, thank you, for CCM therapy for heart failure. And Rob Cowell, VP of Medical Affairs and Chief Medical Officer at Medtronic, Cardiac Rhythm and Heart Failure and Cardiac Ablation Solutions, talking about an implantable system for Remodulin. I would like to just mention as well to the audience that there is an accessible link that's available to you with an additional 100-word statement or so submitted by the companies on each of these products. And the link is available for viewing during this webcast. So I'd like to begin the questions. And in fact, perhaps Brian, maybe I could ask you a question to get us started. And my question to you, Brian, really is there a measurable impact you can cite on the clinical outcomes for patients with your product, and what has been sort of the clinical response to the product thus far?
Thank you very much, Stephen, for the question, and also for considering Edwards Lifesciences Inspirus Resilia aortic valve among this really distinguished list of candidates for the Galien Award. So Edwards remains committed to developing innovative technologies that set a new standard for surgical structural heart interventions. The Inspirus Resilia aortic valve introduces two new innovations that promise to significantly improve care for patients suffering from aortic valve disease: Resilia tissue and VFit technology. So Resilia tissue is a first of its kind platform that has been in development for over a decade and involved more than 100 different evaluations in terms of safety and efficacy. Resilia tissue is bovine pericardial tissue treated with a special integrity preservation technology that effectively eliminates free aldehydes, a key factor in calcification, while protecting and preserving the tissue. VFit technology used in the Inspirus Resilia valve gives a surgeon and patient's ability to plan for patient care beyond that first bioprosthetic valve by providing enhanced options for reintervention if necessary. These technologies combine to result in a valve that should last significantly longer in patients than previous generations of valves, as well as offer better outcomes should a reintervention be needed, making it particularly well suited to younger, more active patients. Now, as to the question about measurable impact on clinical outcomes, we've conducted clinical studies to demonstrate the performance of Resilia tissue. The longest term of these studies to date have been the EU Resilia feasibility study and the COMMENCE study. The feasibility study results have been reported out to 5 years so far with 133 patients, and the larger COMMENCE study has been reported out to 4 years so far and included 689 patients. And I'm proud to say that in both of these studies, there have been 0 cases of structural valve deterioration to date. And although these are considered intermediate results, both of these demonstrate very promising results as we look forward to building longer term data in both COMMENCE and the Resilience clinical study. With this study duration and this number of patients and the patient population, which tended to be a little bit on the young side, other tissue technologies would have expected some instances of structural valve deterioration during that period. That Resilia had none is very encouraging and reflects the results of the rigorous science and preclinical studies that really went into developing Resilia. I'd like to switch gears now and talk about the clinical benefits of VFit technology found on the Inspirus Resilia valve. With the advent of transcatheter aortic valves, an increasingly common method for treating patients with deteriorated bioprosthetic valves is a procedure called valve-in-valve. In a valve-in-valve procedure, a transcatheter valve is deployed within the deteriorated prosthetic valve rather than the patient's native valve. This procedure spares the patient from another open chest procedure when patients are typically older and have additional comorbidities than when they received the first valve. A paper published in 2014, however, demonstrated that patients with small failed bioprosthetic valves who received an interventional valve-in-valve procedure had 3.8 times higher one-year mortality compared to patients with large valves receiving that same procedure. Likewise, patients with intermediate size valves had a 2.8 time higher mortality compared to patients with large surgical valves receiving a valve-in-valve. The issue leading to higher mortality rates in patients with small and intermediate size surgical valves is a high pressure gradient in the new valve combination due to the inherent restriction in the orifice area of the new valve compared to the existing valve. Think of Russian nesting dolls, Matrushka, where the inner one is inherently smaller than the one that it goes inside of. The solution offered by VFit technology is a specially designed valve structure that allows the Inspirus valve to expand in a controlled and uniform manner during a valve-in-valve procedure, thereby allowing maximum flow area of the newly implanted transcatheter valve. As to the clinical response to the Inspirus RESILIA valve, it's been very positive from both patients and clinicians. Since launching in 2017 in the European Union and 2018 in the US, over 65,000 Inspirus valves have been implanted worldwide. The valve has been a favorite of young and active patients due to the unique combination of RESILIA tissue and VFit technology. And in fact, the first patient to receive an Inspirus valve in Europe was a young lady wanting to start a family, where a mechanical valve would have prevented her from doing that. Other patients have chosen the Inspirus valve due to their active lifestyle, such as triathletes, rock climbers, mountain bikers, and so on, who would have been at a significant bleeding risk had they chosen a mechanical valve due to the needed anticoagulation for those valves. At Edwards Lifesciences, we always put the patient first, and I believe the Inspirus RESILIA aortic valve embodies that spirit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, it certainly is exciting to see these innovative new technologies really helping to support our patients with aortic valve problems, particularly as they get younger and looking to sort of find solutions that won't require anticoagulation.
Absolutely.
So that's really quite exciting. If I'm going to move on and talk about another valve area, and I'm going to ask Santosh, if you don't mind, why did your company choose to focus on that mitral valve particular disease state and indication associated with that product that you have? And how significant do you think, the level of unmet clinical need?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Stephen. I'm honored to be here and happy to talk to you about our Microclip technology, which is one of the innovations that we at Abbott are most proud of. Mitral regurgitation, or MR, is the most common form of heart valve disease, and it affects about 4 million people in the United States alone, and millions more around the world. MR often leads to life-altering symptoms such as fatigue, shortness of breath, lightheadedness, and if MR is left untreated, it can cause severe complications leading to heart failure and death. Medications can relieve the symptoms, but they often do not stop the progression of the disease. Prior to Microclip, mitral valve surgery, or a surgical procedure for either repairing or replacing the valve, was an option, but not often for all patients. Many patients with MR are not eligible for surgery because of advanced age, frailty, comorbidities, and other issues that can cause complications from surgery. Knowing this, we made it our goal to develop a minimally invasive option for treating MR in patients who would otherwise go untreated. The Microclip is the world's first of its kind transcatheter mitral valve repair therapy and is backed by over 16 years of clinical evidence. 16 years of clinical data shows improvements in clinical outcomes and quality of life, with proven safety, effectiveness, and durability of those outcomes. This is something that we are very proud of. We know it works. So the Microclip therapy provides an alternative to surgery for patients who aren't surgical candidates, but who need treatment, often urgently, to survive. It is a simple solution to a big problem. Patients undergoing treatment with Microclip usually experience quicker recovery times and shorter hospital stays. Most of them are released from the hospital within about 2 days. The device itself is a tiny clip-like implant that is placed in the heart through a vein in the leg using a catheter. It grasps the leaflets of the mitral valve and reduces the backflow of the blood from the left ventricle to the left atrium during systole. Once in place, Microclip restores proper functioning of the mitral valve and the heart's ability to pump oxygenated blood more efficiently. Now, we are continuing to innovate on the Microclip therapy, and our latest device offers advanced steering and ability to grasp the leaflets, and a greater size range that allows for the clip, that allows the doctor to tailor the therapy to the unique anatomy of the patient's mitral valve. The premise of the Microclip is actually fairly simple, but the device itself has an intricate design that we have spent many years refining and perfecting. even though it's a small device, it has a big impact on the lives of the people that it helps. Ultimately, and despite being one of the most common heart conditions, MR wasn't always treatable using conventional methods in about 50% of the people who suffered from this condition. We knew that filling this need was necessary and aligned with our goals of helping people with structural heart diseases live better lives. And today, this life-changing, life-saving technology has been used to treat over 100,000 patients around the world and is approved in over 75 countries and is in its 4th generation. To close, it's been a great pleasure of mine to work on Microclip, which is a device that has literally transformed the way this devastating disease is being treated and has positively impacted the lives of thousands of patients around the world and will continue to do so. Thanks for hosting me. And on behalf of Abbott, we are honored to be here and delighted to tell you about this important technology.
Thank you very much. And we're honored to have all of you. And we certainly do appreciate that. Mitral regurgitation, like aortic valve disease, is a mechanical problem in essence, which requires a mechanical solution. And surgery is not always an option for patients. And so coming off of a surgical procedure and sort of mimicking that edge-to-edge repair has certainly been a great advantage to our patients. And we appreciate that. And appreciate as an imager during these procedures, the continued innovation of single, arm grasping and so forth and sizing. So we certainly appreciate that and congratulate you on that work. I'd like to change gears thank you. Change gears a little bit from our discussion around a valve disease, and perhaps Rob, I can ask you a question surrounding sort of the challenges, or what challenges really did your company confront in transitioning from sort of early proof of concept human trials to ultimately to market authorization, and any lessons from your experience that might add to a better public understanding, awareness of the medicine sort of innovation process. And perhaps, there's some editorials or documentaries on Netflix that sort of speak to this. So I'd be interested also as your thoughts if the FDA is really a fit for purpose in improving MedTech devices and diagnostics in this area. So thank you for being with us, and I'm interested in your response.
Well, Stephen, a pleasure to join, and I'll break that into a couple of parts. There are a few questions in there, but first, a word on what the device is, the implantable system for Remodulin and the disease it treats. This is a fully implantable, kind of first of its kind device to deliver the drug Remodulin produced by our partner United Therapeutics into the intravascular space continuously for patients with pulmonary hypertension to manage their disease. As many of you know, pulmonary hypertension is a really debilitating situation where the lung vasculature has elevated pressure, and that leads to a situation where you can develop right heart failure or lung failure, often cured only with transplant. This affects mainly women in the range of 30 to 50 years old and can carry a mortality up to 50% at 5 years. And so it's a really difficult and challenging disease for patients who are often, in the midst of careers and having children that they're raising. So, United Therapeutics developed a prostacyclin analog called Remodulin, which has been a great drug for the management of these patients, but it was still left with some side effects. This could be delivered either subcutaneously, which would cause pain often and limit the use. The other way to deliver it was intravenously, but that required an externalized line to an externalized pump, and subjecting patients to a very high risk of infection, which for patients with this level of illness really put them at risk for lethality with those infections. So we got together with United Therapeutics and said, with our experience with both implantable drug delivery systems for pain and spasticity, as well as our experience with implantable electronics, could we deliver this drug in a fully implantable manner? And there were two real challenges we had to overcome. First, we had to redesign a catheter to deliver a drug in the intravascular space and remain patent, even though the delivery rate was at around 0.8 cc's per day. Now, if you think about it, most lines that exist in the intravenous space are supported, their patency is supported by a flow rate of between 80 to 800 or 10 to 100-fold times that volume. And so we had to pull our engineers together to do that and create that. The second challenge we overcame was around the drug itself. So for this to work, we needed to make sure that a patient didn't need to refill this device frequently. And so we had to concentrate the drug and have it stable at high concentrations and have it stable at body temperature continuously. And fortunately for patients with pulmonary hypertension, we were able to solve both these problems. And so those were the technical challenges. I think what we learned in terms of how we get this innovation process to work is really around developing collaboration between diverse teams. Now, most obviously, this was a collaboration between a pharma company and a MedTech company, and that doesn't happen very often. So we really had to leverage kind of who brought what to the table and what our strengths and limitations were, and really work around both of those. And that actually worked quite well, because the second piece of this is we shared the same vision and mission for patients. The second aspect of this is we had to do this within our company as well. And as you know, Medtronic is quite large, but to develop this catheter, we had to borrow from the intrathecal catheter some of our experience with pacing leads, as well as an intracranial shunt catheter to pull this all together. And then the third piece of this was making sure that we worked with United Therapeutics to get a deep understanding of the patient needs we were trying to solve. The third aspect of your question was, where FDA is on this path. And I think they are, you use the term fit for purpose. I think they are really doing a great job at this right now. Innovation, as you're hearing this morning, is scaling up, not just in iterative ways, but in disruptive and innovative ways. And so the FDA has been challenged to kind of deal with really more cutting edge devices and faster. And they've really risen to the occasion with new pathways that allow us to work with them across the entire journey and deliver those therapies on the back end with less impediments. And I'll call on the breakthrough designation classification. And this project that we were working on, the ISR, really came too early for that designation. But we've got a lot of other projects where we're working with the FDA on that. And we've seen, a clear sea change in how they're viewing bringing this kind of innovative technology to the market quickly and safely.
Thank you for that. And I certainly appreciate the latter comments, because it really is important to us working in the MedTech space that we do have an incredible body that's supporting and making sure that these devices are safe for our patients as we use them.
Absolutely.
And I also find it really quite remarkable that you really look towards innovation, and what you've done by taking pharma and MedTech and bringing that together and working collaboratively, which is really the genius is about the collective individuals in the room. And so being able to cross those bridges for a really important clinical area of young patients that have a chronic disease that significantly impacts morbidity and mortality, and trying to find these innovative solutions to improve both morbidity and mortality is remarkable. And we appreciate that and applaud your innovation. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
So David, if I could ask you a similar question that I asked earlier, really about your device and its measurable impact and clinical outcomes for patients, and the clinical response so far that you've seen from your stent.
Thank you, Steve. It's exciting to be part of this week of innovation, and Biotronik is very honored to be a nominee in this category of Best Medical Technology, and in the company of the other presenters on this webinar. But by way of introduction, before I get to your question, the PK Papyrus covered coronary stent is indicated for the treatment of acute perforations of native coronary arteries and coronary artery bypass grafts. It's actually the first covered stent to be launched in the US in about 2 decades. Coronary artery perforation is rare, but when it occurs is potentially life-threatening. And when seconds count, physicians need a covered coronary stent that meets the needs of today's interventionalist. It needs to be able to quickly stop the bleeding. The PK Papyrus innovative ultra-thin single stent design and unique electrospun polyurethane membrane contribute to its superior performance and life-saving technology. Electrostatic forces are applied to spin a polyurethane cover onto the stent surface, creating a thin membrane capable of sealing the perforation. So to speak directly, Steve, to your question about outcomes, measurable outcomes, and also what's the response been from clinicians, it's important first to point out that PK Papyrus is a humanitarian use device, therefore requires IRB approval. The FDA humanitarian use device designation is given to medical devices that treat or diagnose rare diseases or conditions. So by virtue of the fact that it has this humanitarian use designation, it limits some of the prospective outcome studies that could be done. PK offers some unique benefits and advancements in treating perforations. First of all, PK Papyrus is 58% more flexible and has a 23% smaller crossing profile compared to the only other competitive product available in the US market. In addition, PK Papyrus offers the broadest range of sizes and takes the shortest amount of time to deliver. So again, because it's a humanitarian use device, I can refer only to one retrospective case study of 61 patients that required a covered coronary stent for a perforation. And in that study of 61 patients, PK Papyrus took 47% less time to deliver to stop the bleeding. So a mean of 8 minutes to deliver the PK Papyrus and stop the bleeding versus 15 minutes for the competitive product. In terms of physician response, physicians have agreed that while coronary artery perforation is rare, admittedly, time is the enemy. And the feedback is consistent that PK Papyrus's unique design, the superior flexibility and tracking allows physicians to treat a perforation more quickly, avoiding more serious complications. Physicians can trust that PK Papyrus was designed to save lives and to help avoid emergency bypass surgeries, which obviously come with increased risk for patients, and that's always our prime concern, but also more costly for the entire healthcare system. We often hear this innovation and advancement in covered stent technology matters for hospital administrators and physicians, but again, the most important is for our patients who deserve the best outcomes and the fact that the needs of the patients should always come first. Our goal is to have PK Papyrus available in every lab that performs coronary interventions. Steve, thanks again for the time to be part of this webinar. We're honored to be here.
Honored to have you, and those words of the needs of the patient, they are ingrained in our culture and heritage. So we appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. You know, I'm an imaging-based cardiologist, as you know, and we get called to the cath lab to view the consequences of a perforation. And those, I'm glad you cited this, because those extra 8 or 10 minutes make a difference in terms of the impact it's going to have for blood in the pericardial space, which has other long-term consequences beyond just the acute issues as well. So we congratulate you, and it's nice to see you, and thank you for joining us this morning, Dr. Hayes, with this. We're going to switch gears back into the valve arena, and Laxon, if I can ask you again a similar question that I'd asked earlier, why did Edward sort of choose to focus on the particular disease state, and again, how significant did you see for your device was that sort of unmet clinical need?
Steve, thank you so much. We at Edwards, we are absolutely thrilled to have 2 nominations here and to be among such a distinguished panel and a set of products here as well. So, Dr. Lester, we here at Edwards, we like taking on those big clinical challenges that impact our patients, right? And one of the big diseases that we've taken on is the finding a solution for aortic stenosis. Aortic stenosis is a disease of the elderly. Over 2.5 million patients just in the US alone are diagnosed with severe symptomatic aortic stenosis. In a randomized clinical study, it showed that if you do not replace the native aortic valve, 51% of these patients die in 1 year. 51% mortality at 1 year if you do only medical management and not surgical or transcatheter heart valve replacement. This is truly a very deadly disease. It is far more deadly than some cancers. So we took on this both from our surgical valve side and from the transcatheter side to find a suitable solution. Now, there is a huge number of patients that cannot be treated surgically. They have other issues that are going on in their bodies that do not make them operable candidates. So not only is this aortic stenosis a deadly disease, it is undertreated as well. It is mind-boggling to me. So we not only came up with our surgical valves, which is the heritage of Edwards Lifesciences, but we came up and invented the transcatheter heart valves. Now, the SAPIEN 3 Ultra heart valve that we're talking about this morning here is a valve that's built on a cobalt chromium stent. It has tissue treatments for anti-calcification. It has a paravalvular leak solution. It can be crimped on a very small balloon catheter, threaded through the femoral artery in the leg, tracked over the arch, and deployed in the native aortic valve, replacing the aortic valve. There is no open heart surgery. There is no anesthesia. It's on a beating heart, no heart-lung bypass machines, no taking out the native leaflets. And in general, the procedure can be done in about 45 minutes. But the fastest procedure that I saw, from inserting a sheath to tracking the delivery system, deploying the valve and taking the sheath out, was in Vancouver with Dr. John Webb. 12 minutes. You can't even go to the dentist and get your teeth cleaned that quickly. So what's remarkable about the SAPIEN 3 Ultra valve is that death and disabling stroke is less than 1% compared to 2.9% with surgery. 80% of the patients were discharged the following day, and 96% of those patients went home. You got your heart valve replaced and you went home the day after. That is truly remarkable. So it's been an absolute honor to work on this product. Over 30,000 patients have been studied clinically in clinical studies. And I would say that in 65 countries, all these registries that we've had, and 10,000 patients were studied and reported in 6 New England Journal of Medicine articles. So it's a beautifully engineered valve. It's treating over 100,000 patients a year at this point. So thank you, Dr. Lester, for your time.
Thank you. It brings back good memories for me as you're discussing, because John Webb, that's where I learned to do heart catheterization, actually was with John Webb when I was a cardiology fellow in Vancouver some years back. And it is really a remarkable thing to take patients who were otherwise inoperable with a mechanical valve problem that impacted mortality. As you said, half would perhaps not survive a year. And then within less than an hour have a valve replaced, and maybe in the next iterations these will be outpatient procedures to have the aortic valve replaced. So we congratulate you and for the continued growth and iteration of your devices and the impact on this disease state.
Thank you.
I would like to take a moment, certainly last but not least, Dr. Rao, with heart failure and sort of the electrical mechanical issues that we address, I really was interested in some of your thoughts again about the challenges that you had with your device, and again going from proof of concept and how you got this into human trials and to meet market authorizations, and lessons that you might help for us to better understand, and the awareness of the innovation process that you went through with this device to support patients with this complex chronic heart condition.
Hey, thank you, Steve. I want to thank you. I want to thank the Galien Foundation for including Impulse Dynamics in this prestigious group. Coming from a small company like Impulse Dynamics and surrounded by folks from Medtronic and Edwards. It's a little hard not to feel like David in a room full of Goliaths, but I know some of these guys personally, and they're friends and colleagues. So it's a pleasure to be here. Impulse Dynamics, we've been around for over 2 decades. The company was founded in the mid-90s by a gentleman by the name of Shlomo Ben-Haim, who, if you're an electrophysiologist like I was until last year, you know that name well. So heart failure has obviously been a big problem for a long time, and Professor Ben-Haim and his colleagues wanted to look at ways to mitigate heart failure and to improve outcomes for patients that didn't have good outcomes, frankly. So they went back and looked at some studies from the 1960s, looking at work from a gentleman by the name of Earl Wood. And fast forward to the 90s, they repeated some of those studies, looking at the effect of high dose electricity delivered during the absolute refractory period of the cardiac cycle, which as an electrophysiologist is completely non-intuitive. When we deliver electricity, we want to see something happen. And David Hayes and Rob Cowell can attest to that. But so the whole point here was not to elicit a contractile event, but to improve calcium handling and calcium cycling. And that's exactly what they showed. They showed it in bench testing, in animal models, and finally in clinical trials. I think one of the most compelling data points along that journey actually was after showing it in rabbit heart slivers and organ baths. They took 3 hearts that were explanted at the time of heart transplantation. So really the definition of end stage failing hearts, delivered this therapy and showed augmentation of contractility. So that was really kind of proof of concept to move everything forward. We deliver this therapy via a system that looks a lot like a pacemaker. And I always, when I talk to doctors and clinicians about this, I say that's where the similarities end. We have a pulse generator and leads delivering electrical therapy into the heart. Again, high dose during the absolute refractory period. And what we see is immediately, we see improved contractility, improved calcium handling. Long-term, and when I say long-term, I mean in an intermediate time frame of weeks to months and then persisting thereafter, with continued therapy, we see reversal of an abnormal gene profile that's present in the failing heart. So we affect the failing heart, the heart failure condition, the disease, on a cellular and genomic level. It's proven to be very effective. We've done a host of clinical trials. Over 1,500 patients have participated in our clinical trials, and we've shown benefit in clinical metrics like quality of life, NYHA class, as well as 6-minute walk. To get to your question, I think that we are really evidence that the FDA process works and works well. I was a practicing electrophysiologist until last year, and if you asked me what negotiating with the FDA or working with the FDA would be like, I would have drawn a parallel more akin to the DMV than to anything else. But you ever go into the DMV and say, I'm 12 years old, but I'd like a driver's license, they're going to say no, and there's no process that'll work. But the FDA several years ago developed the breakthrough designation process. And it was mentioned before, and we were really, I'd like to say we were beneficiaries of it, but really thousands of patients with heart failure were the beneficiaries of it, because the breakthrough designation is designed for bringing therapies that really address an unmet need in debilitating or fatal illnesses. And heart failure has a 5-year mortality of 50%. We fall into that category. And with all the great innovations in medications, and really with things like CRT, there's still hundreds of thousands of patients in this country that don't have good treatment options. Twice as many patients don't qualify for CRT than do. That's a population of patients who go to the doctor, who have to be admitted frequently, who are on IV diuretics. And those patients couldn't wait years and years and years for the FDA process. So the the breakthrough designation really worked in their favor and in our favor. And we were able to rapidly get through the process and gain FDA approval for our system last year. So if you're asking for my assessment on the FDA, if they're fit for purpose, I would say absolutely. I think that they have adapted to the needs of the American public, to the patient who is waiting for the definitive, unique therapy, and listened. And that breakthrough process really worked well for us, and really worked well for the patient. So, as we say at Impulse Dynamics, hope is here, and the corollary to that is we're able to deliver it. Thank you, Steve, and thank you to everyone at Galien.
Thank you. Like your last comments, I think it could be spoken for everybody that hope is here. And much of this sort of chronic condition of heart failure is left with neurohormonal modulating pharmacotherapies, which have been incredibly impactful, certain devices, but these types of evolving devices that sort of address that sort of, as we say, electrical, mechanical issues that may improve contractility is really remarkable. And we really appreciate the work that you guys are doing here. That sort of sums up the questions that I sort of had for each one of you. I want to remind the participants to please use the Q&A session, so the button, excuse me, so that we have an opportunity to ask some questions that you might have. While that's ongoing, though, I was sort of thinking during this discussion and ask a question to all of you, and perhaps I should have thought this through further on Zoom, like how I would know who wants to speak first or answer that, but maybe just raise a hand and chime. But I'm really interested, in listening to all of you and how you've taken this sort of idealism and translating that into action and in inventing sort of the healthcare for tomorrow. I'd be interested in your thoughts about sort of what new MedTech science excites you the most currently today. And, if we're going to have this awards committee and we're reviewing things 5-10 years from now, what do you think we'll be looking at? So that's sort of a question I have for all of you.
I'll jump in and take that. Take the first stab at that. I'll tell you that, as I said, I was a practicing electrophysiologist until last year, and coming onto the industry side and seeing all the resources that are spent in innovation, I think that one of the things I think you'll see is smaller devices with less hardware. I think that's a big one, because as we deliver more from the device size, we deliver more and more therapies to patients, we start, adding bulk, and with those therapies, with that hardware, come unintended consequences that may not be beneficial. But the other one that I see is longevity of devices. And to that end, I think we at Impulse Dynamics, we actually have a game-changing kind of therapy in that our device is rechargeable. We have a 15-year battery that is rechargeable, where the patient only needs to charge for 60 to 90 minutes a week, and they get 15 years of therapy. So for someone who's 65 years old with heart failure, if they do that, and keep in mind that 80+% of patients have at least a 1 NYHA improvement with CCM therapy, and 40 to 45% actually improve 2 classes. So these are patients that may get one device and be done for the rest of their lives. So I think that that's a path that I think many companies are going to start to follow, because again, we're putting the patient first, as everyone on this panel indicated. That's the primary goal here for all of us.
So Stephen, I can chime in as well. I fully agree with Issue's statement about reduction in size. We're trying hard to minimize the size of our products and remove the amount of material that's in the intravascular space. And I think the second aspect is connectivity. We are trying to leverage not only in the tools that physicians use, but also patients use to connect their devices to ones they carry with them. So most of our implantable devices deliver an array of information so we can program them, but they're also giving a lot of information about the state of the patient that can be followed longitudinally. And I think what's important is we've had a history of kind of giving the patient a monitor or some tool that is kind of foreign to their world and asking them to come into our world. And what we're trying to do now by leveraging kind of phone-based applications to communicate with our devices and Bluetooth technology or iPads is bringing the patient's care into their own world. We bring it to them as opposed to the other way around. And I think that's an important aspect of kind of meeting patients' needs and bringing the care to them going forward.
Stephen, if I may speak, from a structural heart standpoint, I think the addressable treatment areas for the structural heart therapies are large today and are projected to grow significantly over the next decade. And the prominence of the structural heart therapies and the need for treatment are driven by three factors, which are sort of interrelated. First, the structural heart diseases have been historically undertreated, whether it is mitral valve repair and replacement, tricuspid valve repair and replacement, aortic stenosis, left atrial appendage occlusion, congenital heart diseases, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there. So at Abbott, we either have products approved or are being investigated in clinical trials to get those approvals. Secondly, the world is aging, right? People are living longer. So a lot of the degenerative heart diseases where the heart simply wears out are going to increase in prevalence in the coming years. So there's a need for developing further therapies to address those disease states. And thirdly, advancements in imaging and other enabling technologies will allow treatment of some of these structural heart diseases, or most of these structural heart diseases, in a minimally invasive manner. So I think there's a lot of room for minimally invasive technologies to actually become the standard of care. So from a structural heart perspective, I think there is a lot of room for growth. There is a lot of room for developing tools and devices that will help us address these unmet clinical need and help, continue to help thousands of patients around the world. The other thing also is, one of the things that the pandemic has actually taught us is it has put a spotlight on delivering healthcare differently, right? In terms of, and maybe even remotely, in terms of pre and post procedural visits. So it's crucial that that technology continues to evolve for remote support, so that we can provide guidance on the operating procedures to our clinicians more effectively. So I think those are some of the areas I think will be the areas for focus in the future.
Steve, let me add just a little to that, if I may. And I want to add to the comment that both Santosh and Rob made. As long the longer I'm in medicine or a related field, I'm excited about everything. So as I listen to this webinar today, whether it's coronary or device or structural, it's all exciting and really the sky's the limit. But in terms of the connectivity and what we've learned from the pandemic is that we have to get better and better at delivering things remotely, and especially in chronic disease management. And on top of that, as we do more remotely and we are harnessing more and more data on a regular basis, I know the terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence are used broadly and thrown around a lot. But even though some have been using machine learning for really decades, like our rate adaptive sensor is machine learning based, it's closed loop. And the more we harness the data and we learn how to use that and iterate then on the technology based on that data, really the sky's the limit on what we can do remotely for a lot of the chronic disease management we've talked about today. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I'm excited by all of it.
Steve, I want to jump in here and add a few things as well. I'm not on mute, right? You can hear me.
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, so here at Edwards, right, we have a huge push into structural heart disease, we've got mitral programs, tricuspid programs, and even on our surgical side. We are so patient focused here. So we try to imagine, if you are a patient, wouldn't it be fantastic to have most of your diagnostics done remotely, not in a hospital, where you come to the hospital and spend the least amount of time, right? You have fast procedures, very minimally invasive procedures, small devices, your footprint that you leave in the patient is really small. And you can continue to monitor these patients when they've left the hospital. So durability of these devices is absolutely important. We have what we call valve in a valve. If you put a transcatheter heart valve in, you can come back later and put another valve inside it. The work that Brian and the surgical side of Edwards is working on, they've got the latest anti-calcification tissue treatment on that Inspirus valve. And as Brian was talking about, they built a sewing ring so that you can actually crack that open and someday in the future implant a transcatheter valve. So this is the kind of thinking that we are looking at. How can we have less procedures and take care of these patients for the duration of their lives? Thank you, Dr. Lester.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump in here if I may.
I'd love you to, please.
Yeah, great. I agree with everything Loxon just said, and for that matter, everything everyone said. I mean, really great discussion, and I think it's going to be hard for me to say anything that hasn't been said already. But really, I think specific to heart valves, the holy grail is a heart valve that literally lasts forever. I mean, we do have these great technologies like Loxon was just talking about for valve and valve that, if and when that first valve fails, they can go in, implant another valve within it in a minimally invasive way. But really the holy grail is to develop a valve that would literally last forever. And so that's where anti-calcification treatments and newer types of tissues or other materials, I'll just say generically, come into play, where if somebody has disease of their native aortic valve, they get a replacement, be it surgical or transcatheter, and they're just done. That valve is going to last them the rest of their life. And so we actually have an entire team here at Edwards dedicated to developing sort of the next generation of tissue or other types of leaflet materials, our tissue center of excellence. And really the goal there is that, again, the patient gets that one valve, it lasts them the rest of their life. And from a purely mechanical perspective, we've already achieved this, where if we take our valves and put them in a durability tester, again, this is an in vitro test. We've tested these valves out to over 2 billion with a B cycles, which is equivalent of like 50 years of opening and closing cycles under pressure, and the valves just continue to go. Right, but it's really when you introduce that biological element in the body that things like calcification and so on can happen. So I think, specific to valves, that's really the next frontier, is coming out with that valve that has infinite durability, not only mechanically, but also biologically.
That's absolutely true. I think you've all mentioned this, and I would encourage the participants to listen in on some of the other webinars, which really speak to the impact that I think we all as healthcare consumers have to know and understand our own data. And it may be as simple as things as how many steps did you take? How did you sleep last night? It really helps to support, promote, and sustain these positive changes in behavior, which are so critical to the management of chronic disease. So, I mean, it's not really in the construct of what we're talking about in our webinar, but really, I think it extends beyond that, and would encourage everybody or the participants to listen to some of the other webinars that address some of these important issues in MedTech. MedTech's a lot of fun. MedTech's going to be bigger than pharma, if not already. And it's why myself personally, as a physician, founded and run our MedTech Accelerator program with a very innovative university, Arizona State University, where I live here in Arizona, because it's fun for us to be able to engage in such a diverse milieu of intellectual excellence, from engineers to other scientists, data scientists, and physicians. So I think we're all in a really fun space. It's been a really exciting and inspiring discussion this morning. I would like to just take a moment in our last few minutes to share the poll results. So if we can just put those up and so we can see the results, which is the first time I've seen them too. So universal access to medicines and vaccines, but a pretty tight along those questions. So thank you for taking the time to engage in that. So I really do want to thank all the representatives from these diverse companies and congratulate you on, as I said earlier, translating your idealism into action and really inventing and helping to invent the healthcare for tomorrow, or of tomorrow. And to also mention that this webcast will be viewable on the Galien Foundation homepage. So you have an opportunity to review that. I also would like to highlight Thursday's forum, the awards cocktail and presentation of the 2020 Vallejo's Pro Bono Human Award winner, Dr. William Fogy. So to congratulate him and to remind us all for the events that are occurring on Thursday, where the winners will be. It's been an absolute honor and privilege for me to be a part of the awards committee. It's been an honor and privilege for me to take or have the opportunity to spend time with all of you this morning. And unless there are any other parting comments or questions, I just would like to say thank you once again, and look forward to continued innovation and bringing science to our patients in the future to again help the human condition. So I thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Best medical technology,